G'day fellow flight simmers and random YouTubers. I want you to have a look at this flight plan. Yeah, and I guess there's some of you will pick it up straight away, and some of you might laugh, some may even cry. So one of the things I find, and when I'm controlling on VATPAC, is you look for red flags. And one of the best ways to find a red flag is when a person comes up and puts up a flight plan like this. You know that this guy hasn't really done a lot of research, hasn't really has an idea what actually is required. And the first thing I want you to notice, and there's a lot of things that, so he wants to go from Sydney down to Kingscote, which is in Kangaroo Island, and he's flying a Super King at 350, and that's his level. He wants to go at 50,000 feet. Well, I'm sure as hell know that Super King Air doesn't go up to 50,000 feet. He hasn't given us a time of departure, but this is the sealer. And he called me up and he wanted a clearance. So that to me is a red flag. And in my experience, I've found out that if a person doesn't know how to do something reasonably basic as a flight plan, then you're going to have problems with that person. So hence, this is the reason why I'm doing this video. And I think the sealer was 2 days ago when a guy called me up in Albury, I think he was, and he was flying an Airbus 320, and he wanted to go down into Moorabbin. Yes, he wanted to go to Moorabbin, Airbus 320, and he filed VFR at flight level 125, and he wanted to go at, so that to me was another red flag. So, this is why I'm making this video, and I've hoped that maybe somebody out there was going to do something, because last 6 months I've been working, etc. But I think that was the straw that broke the camel's back, so to speak. So I've now decided to take it on my shoulder. Well, I'm drinking me chai tea. It's a killer. Anyhow, all right. So we start off. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to start from the very basics. If you're starting out at Vatsim, you need to start with the basics. There are no shortcuts in life, and there's certainly no shortcuts in the VATPAC or the Vatsim environment. You can make shortcuts, but you're not going to get the full experience of what flying is all about. Okay, now, the age-old question. Is a flight simulator a game, or is it a simulator? Well, actually it's both. It depends on what you want. And I've said this many times in my videos. You can make it as real as you want or unreal. Now let's say, for example, I'm a young guy and I bought my whatever. Let's say, for example, I've done the right step and I bought a Cessna 172 and I want to go down here from Moorabbin and I want to go up here to Bendigo. I want to go via Melbourne. And let's say I want to go 2,000 feet, let's just say. And I load all this flight plan in. I get in my Cessna and off I go and, take off in the right direction from the runway in Moorabbin. And we fly over Melbourne and, we land at Bendigo. If you're going to do that, then the simulator becomes a game. Because you haven't given any consideration of what airspace you're flying in. If you're flying over Melbourne at 2,000 feet, you haven't given any consideration. Oh, by the way, if we're going online, that is. If you're flying offline, that's fine. You can do whatever you want. But we're talking about an online environment. So, and you fly over Melbourne at 2,000 feet, not realising suddenly you've blocked all incoming and or arriving and departing aircraft, because suddenly now, and depends on where your aircraft is, other aircraft cannot fly through 2,000 because you blocked that level off, and you go up and you follow your purple line on your GPS. If you're playing, or if you're doing this with Flight Simulator, it's a game. However, if you make considerations and you follow the rules, so to speak, and you fly at the right level, and you consider that okay, do I need to talk to ATC if I'm going through what is called Class Charlie airspace? Who do I need to talk to? What frequency? Blah, blah, blah. And then once I go past the approach control, I need to talk to someone. It depends if I'm what they call IFR or VFR. Then it becomes more of a simulator. But now, because you've decided to fly like a simulator, now you're required to know a lot more knowledge. So, and I've always said, Vatsim will teach you how to interact with ATC, but ironically enough, it won't teach you how to fly a plane. And you think, well, what is it? You just sit behind the controls and put a bit of power, and yeah, you can do all that. But flying a plane involves a lot more. Okay, so let's start out. Now hopefully I won't be going, I don't know how many parts this series is going to go for. We just need to cover what I think are the bare essentials of flying on Vatsim or Vatpack, depends on where you are. Okay, the absolutely first thing I don't want you to do, which 90% of people will do, is they will buy a jet. Now, that's very fine. If you like to go from Melbourne to Adelaide, you do the ILS at Adelaide, you come back to Melbourne, you do the ILS at Adelaide, you go from Sydney to Melbourne, you do the ILS at runway 27. Now, if that's your thing, power to you. Great, if that's what gives you enjoyment. But for me, I don't know about you, I like a bit of a challenge. So understanding the rules and also doing different types of approaches is what challenges me and what keeps me going. So if you end up buying a jet and you go from Melbourne to Sydney and Sydney to Canberra and Canberra to whatever, and to me, the ILS at Sydney is pretty much like the ILS at Canberra, which is pretty much like the ILS at Adelaide. You're not really challenging yourself. You're just sitting there. And I call them push-button pilots. Now, there's no right or wrong, if that's what you want to do. But flying's a lot more involved than that. So, now back in the day before Flight Simulator, and I know people who'd known me for a long time know that I used to fly the Cessna 172. And I used to do it for a number of reasons, because it taught me a lot of the basics. It taught me what really I need to know about flying, and so I did a lot of investigating, because I'm not a pilot by profession. So I had to go through heaps and heaps of documents. So one of the first documents, before I go on to that, so what I did with Flight Simulator, now by the way, if you do the right thing and you have your Cessna, and I think in the premium edition Microsoft Flight Simulator, there's the default flight or default Cessna 172. Well, whatever you use, don't use the default. Okay, so what I've done is I've used, in my premium edition, there's an add-on, and it's a mod from called Sim. Okay, and it basically gives you a sort of almost study level, as I say, near study level, of the analog 172. Okay, and there it is there. So the first thing you can do is try to, if you can, purchase. But you've got to have, I think, the premium, because only the premium gives you the analog system. Now, if you've got the G1000, well, good on you. But the analog system, to me, is the best way to start. Okay, so you've got your Cessna. Now, I recommend downloading the pilot's operating handbook. Now, I back in the day flew the pilot, just over, sorry about this, I did have it here somewhere. Okay, so the next thing I want you to do is, before you do any flying, just start to read, and read a lot. And these days, the aircraft that's in Microflight Simulator is the 172 Skyhawk. And you don't have to read. Now, just going back to the point. Now, the most basic of planes was the Cessna 172. Up here you can see it's got almost 500 pages of notes. And that's for a basic. So why would you want to go and buy a plane, a PMDG, or who are fantastic, absolutely fantastic, which is probably several thousand? Why would you want to learn how to run before you walk? To me, it just makes more sense, starting off with the basics. And you've got to, it's almost impossible. Not many people read 500 pages unless you're totally bored. But there are things that you need to know. Like you need to know, as you can see here, I've gone through this, and surface ceiling, you've got to know 14,000 feet. No use trying to get your Cessna up to 20,000 feet, because it'll never work. And you'll see here, all these things are highlighted. These are basically I've memorised, okay, to a point. I haven't memorised everything because it's been a while, but there are things like, who gives a rat's if 27 feet long? In the Vatsim world, I don't need to know that information. But you can pick the diamonds out of you know what all these terms mean. So your knots calibrated airspeeds, your knots indicated airspeed, your true airspeed. Okay? Vx and Vy, what does that mean? A standard temperature and pressure. You need to understand that. Why? Because that there helps you understand performance charts. And that's another video. So get to understand all, and just sort of understand what this means. So you know that you never exceed speed for calibrated airspeeds, never greater 160, or your indicated airspeeds. Rarely use a calibrator, but we use the indicator. So 163. Just never go past 129 unless you want to structurally damage your aircraft. So these are all things you have to internalise. You have to memorise this. There's no shortcuts. Probably understand a little bit about the markings. So you need to understand important things like I've highlighted, you know. So, and now for Vatsim, of course, you don't need to know emergency procedures. And if you're on my channel, I won't allow it anyhow. So that's another story. So understand your normal procedure. So you can skip the emergency procedures, because start understanding or looking at through normal procedures. You need to internalise all these speeds to know exactly what speeds. No, this is probably one of the most I've seen trying to see. On the Vatsim environment, you see many wonderful things. I remember once this guy's trying to land a Cessna in 25 knot crosswinds. Well, good luck, because it tells you quite clearly, hey, if you've got 15 knots, and that's part of your planning, that's part of understanding what your aircraft is capable of. Okay, and then of course the checklists, and that's what I use all the time now. Okay, so this, you need to pick out the good things that you think are applicable to you. Okay, so, and then of course right down the end here you've got, but I don't want to, starting engine, hot engine or a cold engine, so all these things. So I won't bore you, otherwise this thing will go too long. Okay, so what do we do? So the first thing is know how to fly your plane, and we're going to start off with the Cessna. Okay, so once you know how to start flying a Cessna, the next thing you really need to know is how to fly a circuit. Know what upwind, crosswind, downwind, base leg, final mean. And more importantly, understanding the settings that you need, because you're going to do full power up when you take off, but at some stage you don't want to keep that full power off and going 120 in the circuit. When you're going downwind, for example, you do it 90 knots, which means you've got to bring in your RPMs, which is that black knob, by the way, that's your throttle. If you look at your, you reduce it to 1900, around about 1900, 2000 revs. And then when you start to what they call a beam the numbers, you reduce it down to 80 knots for descent, and that means you reduce the RPMs, and that's when you add your 1 degree of flaps. And then when you're turning base, you're doing on 75 and 65 on final. These are all things you need to know and understand, okay? When you put your flaps in, what power settings, at each stage of the circuit. You need to find that out. Now, what I found is this mob called Cessna 172 Training Supplement, and I'm not sure, I think you can still download this somewhere, and I've worked through this book. Because this book is fantastic. Now let's just say there's your normal procedure for takeoff, departure procedures. Okay, you look at that. And that's if you're departing, not necessarily in the circuit. Okay, so you do your short field takeoffs. You can practice short field takeoff. Pick a short field somewhere, some little green grass strip runway somewhere, and you can do your short field because you want to know how to get over the top of this tree. So you've got to understand this is why a thing called VX and VY come into it, okay? So understand that concept, soft field takeoffs. Okay, so this is a great book. I did a lot of work on this book as far as understanding a whole lot of things, like pitch and power. I think... Now, this is probably one of the most important, pitch and power. You pitch for speed and you power up for altitude, okay? So if you want to increase your speed on final, you pitch down. If you want to decrease, you pitch up. And then if you want to increase your altitude, you power up. Because if you say, for example, on final, you can see you're too low, well, you've got to power up because that'll give you altitude. So you understand all that sort of stuff. So this is a great book for learning. Like I said, and you can still download this manual by the way, but A2A back in the day made the best 172, and you can see how I've actually highlighted a few things and also just read through and just basically what I need to know. Once again, it tells you here, VNE, never exceed, all these. You just need to internalise all this sort of stuff. Okay? And these days I normally use that one. I've got it all printed out, etc. But know that by heart, because when you're starting an engine, you can't... there's only a few seconds. By the time you read this, you only need what they call prime the engine for 3 to 5 seconds. But if you have to sort of read this, it makes the job harder. So you just basically need to internalise this area here in green, so you know exactly what stage you're at, and then you go on and you follow on from there. So, okay, so now you've come to a point where you've learned how to handle the aircraft, you've got a few, numbers in your head. So after you've done your circuit training, and it may be frustrating and all that, now you can start to understand what they do, what they mean crosswind landings. And once again, you can come back to this book, and this book will tell you how to do crosswind landings. And I think I saw it here. Okay, so you can read that and try setting up your the flight simulator, whether it's be X-Plane, P3D, and that gives you an idea how to do a crosswind landing. Okay, because not every airfield you come into is going to have a perfect headwind. More often than not, you're actually going to get a crosswind. So understand how to do a crosswind landing. It's absolutely vital, because more often than not, that's what you'll get, crosswind landing. Okay, so we've understood how to handle the aircraft, and at that point we're not talking to anyone, we're not transmitting over, we're just being offline and just practicing how to handle our aircraft. Now, for some of you, it might pick it up real quick, others may struggle, but that's the way it is. Now, once you know how to handle your aircraft, you have to now understand some basic concepts. Now, if I'm understand what the difference between IFR and VFR. IFR is what they call instrument flight rules. VFR is visual flight rules. And if you're a Cessna Unit 172, more often than not, you're going to fly well. You would use the set 172 to fly VFR. And that means visual flight rules has certain stipulations. It doesn't mean there's a condition, what they call a METAR. Sometimes it's CAV-OK. And a lot of people think, well, CAV-OK is what they call visual meteorological conditions. Yeah, it is, but there's certain stipulations as well. It doesn't necessarily, if it's CAV-OK, there are other criteria to determine whether something is suitable for VFR. And just give me a moment, I'm just trying to find where I'll put that. Okay. Oh, and before we do anything else, as well as understand your class of airspace. Do I need to talk to ATC? In Australia, we've got Class A airspace, class which is only for IFR aircraft. Next is Class C, and that's you need a clearance. Doesn't matter whether an IFR aircraft or VFR aircraft. There's Class D, which you need, whether you're VFR or IFR aircraft, you need a clearance. There's Class E. Now, if you're an IFR aircraft, you need a clearance, but if you're a VFR aircraft, you don't need a clearance to go into Class E. And then there's the famous Class G. So here it is there, Australian airspace structure. Now, when you're starting off, more often than not, you're going to fly in what they call Class G. Okay? So now, to fly in Class G, apart from all these other stipulations, we're looking at VFR here on the left. So, and it says here on the left, you say radio required. We're not too worried about that. But what we want to do is, this tabulates it, but I found this diagram here tells you a lot more. It's a better way. And this is, by the way, this is the Visual Flight Rules Guide, okay? So now I'm not going to hold your hand. I'm not going to say, oh, you can get the links down below. I'm not that sort of guy. I want you guys to go and look for it. I want you guys to use your initiative, and I want you guys to look and research. because I'm not in the habit of saying, I want you guys to be a little bit more intuitive. Okay, so most of your flying when you're beginning is going to be in Class G, which is what they call uncontrolled airspace. So in Class G airspace, if you're at or below, whichever is the higher of 3,000 or 1,000, and you've got flight visibility of 5,000, and you're just clear of cloud, and you've got inside of ground water, that is what they call VMC, Visual Meteorological Condition. Then you can fly VFR. Okay, and once, of course, you get into more constrictive airspace, i.e. Class Charlie or Class Delta, then the visibility, the rules become a little bit more stringent. In other words, for example, in Class Alpha Bravo Charlie Echo, and you're below 10,000, okay, here you're at or below, whichever's the higher, so if you're 3,000 or 2,500, and you can just be clear of a cloud, okay? Or if you're 1,000 feet above the ground, you just have to be a cloud. But once you start getting below 10,000, let's say, for example, flying 8,500, now you've got to be a certain distance horizontally and vertically from cloud. So these are your VMC, these are your conditions for flying in different class airspace. You've got to know that. Okay, so that's the so they're the criteria. Most of these things you can look up, but I like to memorize it because I don't want to be looking at searching for these all the time. Okay, so every good flight, I reckon, starts with a good plan. Now, for VFR aircraft, these things called navigation charts, because like anything else, you're not going to go, if you're driving from point A to B and you don't know the way, well, you're going to use some sort of GPS or some system to tell you the way. Now, if you're a VFR, and by the way, I'm jumping the gun here, but if you're a VFR flight and you decide to go from Moorabbin, right, let me just highlight this. Okay, so let's say you've got your Cessna 172 and you want to go from, and this has been done many, many times. And I've seen guys take off from Moorabbin, they don't contact me. Well, they take off and they come straight into Melbourne. Well, and they're flying at 2,500. Well, that's, to me, shows they don't really understand the airspace. Okay, because clearly here, by the way, understand what a VFR chart, or how to read a VFR chart. And most of it is intuitive. Like, for example, that's a danger area, a lot of parachuting. Now, you can fly through danger areas, but you can't fly through restricted areas. And the way you know, by the way, is you're flying in the real world, they call ATC and they ask if danger area 342 is active. Because sometimes you fly and you want to go to Avalon, you go through there and up through there and, go into Avalon. So, know what the difference between restricted airspace and danger airspace is, okay? So let's say, for example, you want to take off from Moorabbin and you go into Class Charlie. By knowing what Class Charlie airspace is, you know that at some point I need a clearance to get into here, even if I'm a VFR aircraft, and that's, like I said before, understand the class of airspace. Everything has an order to it. So understand your airspace is one of probably the most challenging things to remember. Well, not necessarily remember, because a lot of people these days in the real world, you've got this on your iPad and you can, and you've got it on your GPS. So, understand your airspace is one of the probably the most challenging things to remember. Well, not necessarily remember, because a lot of people these days in the real world, you've got this on your iPad and you can, and you've got it on your GPS. So, So understand there's a difference between flying that way and there's a difference flying that way. And the difference flying down this way, let's say for example I want to fly along here, okay, and I want to fly along the coast and check out Portsea, maybe go over to Ocean Grove and do a U-turn, whatever, and come back up. Can I fly, and let's say for example I want to fly at 2,500. Well, first of all, do I need a flight plan? And the simple answer is no. If you're a VFR aircraft and you're flying in Class G airspace, and that's what it is, you're flying at 2,500, so you're under what they call the Class Charlie lowest level, which is 4,500. So from there to down there, let's do this. So from Moorabbin down to there, you're under the Class Charlie airspace. And then once you pass Frankston, you've got another step, which is 8,500. So you're well below that step, so you still don't need to talk to anyone. And if I'm flying down here, you're below the Class Echo, and I still don't need to. So when you're doing your flight plan, know if you need to talk to anyone and if you need to put in a flight plan. Okay, so you don't need to talk to anyone and as far as I'm concerned, when I'm flying VFR, I don't really want to talk to anyone because it's hard enough flying the plane anyhow. So, now, sorry, I'm looking at my notes because I'll put some notes in, otherwise start talking about things that's not really relevant if I don't put notes in. So, like I said, understand, and these notes, these charts are available on what they call the AIP site. And once again, I'll let you find out. If you don't know and you're desperate, I'll put it in the thing, and I'll put a link in the description later on, or I'll send you a direct link, or I'll put it on the notes on the comments. But yeah, so you can download these charts. Now, if I'm, as I was saying, with flight planning, so if I'm just following the coast and I'm using the coast as a reference point, because don't forget, VFR flight planning is all about making reference to the ground or water. So all I'm doing is I'm making a reference. I'm saying, well, I'm just going to fly along the coast, down to Portsea. Once I come to the end, I'll do a bit of a U-turn, come back, and that's me done. And if you use this type of navigation, it's called pilotage. Okay? Now, let's say, though, I want to do this. I want to fly, and I'll just try to minimize this a little bit. Let's say I want to fly from Moorabbin, and I've got a mate, and he lives up in Romsey. And you think, oh, that looks all right. Now, in the real world, if they fly that route there, that particular route there, it's called dead reckoning. And what they do is they get this, and there's a ruler. They use a ruler and they measure that angle. And that from that point to that point is called the track. In other words, it's the line that you draw. And they measure that angle there between there and there. So, sorry, let me just... And they measure that angle from there all around to there. And let's say, for argument's sake, we know that this up here is 360, and I don't want to go into this because you guys can do it yourselves. We know that true north is 360, and we know magnetic north, depends on where you are, is not 360. It might be to the left or right. So you need to measure what they call the magnetic tracker across there. Now, there's some great software out there that allows you, if you use what they call dead reckoning, okay, it gives you the magnetic heading that you want to go. And the best one that I use is Little Nav Map. And there's another one called Plan G, and that will give you the magnetic course that you need to fly, and this is including winds. And having said that, there's another. You can use Sky Vector. Okay, so let's say, for example, we want to go from, and we won't. So we want to go from Moorabbin to Romsey. We want to fly that. We want to go, we want to stay east of Melbourne Airport, and we want to go at 3,500, whatever. Now, you see here it's got 322. And what this does here, Sky Vector gives you a great instrument, a great tool, in that it lets you download a nav log. And I've got this at 8,000. Let's say I'll redo this. Okay, so there's your nav log. And what does this show you? If I want to fly direct from Moorabbin to Romsey, and at 3,500, in the real world, your wind direction's 187, your wind speed's 13, and your temperature, and we won't get into this, otherwise I'll do your head in. I've probably done enough stuff here to do your head in. The temperature at 3,500 is 17 degrees, which means +2 means it's 2 degrees above standard. And remember some time ago I talked about standard temperature and an understanding. So if you know what standard temperature and pressure is, right, you know what this means. That means you're 2 degrees above standard. In other words, they reckon at 3,500 you should be 15 degrees, but this is 17. So you have to make an adjustment when you're calculating for fuel. Okay, but let's not get too much into that. So your TAS is your true airspeed is 72 knots, because if I'm flying at, we'll make it 110, and we'll do another one. So we can see here that your true airspeed, because it's obviously you've got even though your true airspeed is, or your indicated airspeed 110, but you're going to be flying into the wind, so it's 72 knots. And now this is your track, 334. In other words, if I draw a straight line from A to B, and you measure off on a compass, it's 334 degrees. Okay. Now, because in the world there is weather, there's two things that make your track deviate from 334. If I flew in a perfect world, or won't say perfect world, but if I grab my plane and head at 334 degrees, disregarding any weather and disregarding any magnetic deviation, in other words, no such thing as magnetic variation, because obviously, as you know, that magnetic heading is different from your true heading, then I could go from Moorabbin to Romsey flying that heading there. However, there is weather, and from the weather, this does it for you, what they call wind correction angle, and it's minus 6 degrees, and so your true heading is 328. But if I flew a heading of 328, I'd never get to Romsey, because, as you know, there is a variation in the Earth's crust, a magnetic variation. So you subtract 12 degrees from 328, and that's the heading that I need to go, 316. Okay, so that is when taking off. Now, from your top of climb into Romsey, then I need to fly 320, and that's what this figure here indicates, or actually indicates 322. But that's the sort of thing, and this is called dead reckoning. In other words, you're using calculations, and once again, investigate, understand how to work out or how to do dead reckoning. Okay, so hopefully I'm going to wrap this up, because I'm not sure how long I've been going, but I've been going for 40 minutes, which is way too long. Okay, so that's wrap it up. Now the next thing I'm going to be dealing with is we're going to do a cross-country navigation. And you've asked many pilots, when they do it, it's probably one of the most exciting things you do, because they start to see where their level of all those years or their study starts to come to fruition, because they actually use all the principles they've learned in actually doing a cross-country nav. Okay, so I'm going to wrap it up now. It's been enough. Until next time, I'll see you all later. Cheers.